I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm very excited about this, in part for the reasons that I think you guys were just talking about, which is that this seems to be an issue that has prompted what, at least from my perspective, is an unexpected amount of debate, even within the left. Were you guys talking about the sort of Holly Buck Jacobin article back and forth?
Yeah.
No, well, we weren't talking about that when
Yeah.
you came in. No, yeah,
I think we were.
What,
I think we were talking about. We were sort of. Uh, we were. We were questioning the idea that there actually is a debate on the left because
Yeah.
I don't actually think
Yeah.
there is. There's like a couple big tech friendly voices and literally everyone else.
I
But
mean, yeah.
I'm
That
happy
whole,
to talk about Buck's piece.
okay, so
yeah,
help
that
me
piece.
understand this.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead. That piece, what?
Oh no, I think it's a huge outlier, and it's like the fact that I don't know if it represents. I mean, I'm sure there are people who agree with it, on the left, but I don't. I feel like it's a huge outlier, like way out there. That is just, I don't know. It was just surprising that it even appeared in the Jacobin, to be honest.
Well, that's what's so interesting about this. So let's just go ahead and cold open this. I'll ask you each to just go ahead and introduce yourselves to save us some time. But just to orient people who are jumping into this conversation, there was a piece about AI written in Jacobin titled "Democratic Governance of AI is the Real Solution" by Holly Buck, who is a professor who's been on Bad Faith before, I think in maybe the summer of 2022, if I recall correctly. And the case that she makes is basically against this proposed moratorium on data centers being built that was proposed by AOC and Bernie Sanders jointly, saying basically that a pause is no substitute for real policy, arguing that the people who are arguing for a pause are sort of the Brahmin elite bourgeois green environmentalists who are out of touch with what the interests of working class people are, and that more specifically, to make a moratorium like this would create asymmetries in terms of who can access AI, and that wealthier people who are the people that are opposing the building of data centers will be able to pay a premium for the higher costs of AI, and it is poorer, more working class people who aren't going to be able to, say, Google legal advice for themselves and get AI answers, and they also won't be able to afford counsel, and therefore they will be doubly prejudiced by a moratorium. Do you think, is that a
All
fair
of our
summary
blood
of her
pressure
argument?
has just been ratcheting up and up and up as you've been going through these arguments.
I mean,
Okay.
exactly. Or just, it does seem like
that's a fair
AI,
summary.
and seems like an AI agent wrote that, to be honest.
Okay, well, let's start with you, Aaron Regunberg, since you had the most spirited response to that. Introduce yourself to the audience. Obviously, you're all returning guests to Bad Faith Podcast, but tell them why they should listen to you, and then go ahead and tell the folks what you make of this Buck piece.
Hi, everyone. I'm Aaron Regunberg. I'm a climate lawyer now, longtime organizer, former state legislator. Do some writing, actually now co-host a podcast with The Nation called the Fighting Fascism podcast. But yeah, I wrote a response to this piece in Jacobin. Felt it was important that there be a response. Yeah, I mean there are basically every line in this piece I felt was disingenuous or dumb. But the sort of big picture buckets of problems. One, there's this the core thesis is we shouldn't have a AI moratorium. We should have regulation and democratic governance. Obviously, that's what everyone wants. The question is, how do we get it? And we have a system where AI billionaires are putting literally hundreds of millions of dollars into super PACs in order to stop it. This is the one leverage point, right? They need to have this build out of data centers for their particular model of AI, which is a model of consolidation and bringing more power and authority into the hands of a few big tech billionaires. But for that model to work, they need to do this. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where local communities have some authority to be a check. It is the only leverage we currently have right now. If we want to get democratic governance, this is the way we do it. So there was that argument, and then the other most enraging to me argument in that piece was her dismissal of the of the people who are doing this organizing and of the like potential for these coalitions. She said something like, "This is a dead end because um, the people doing this have distinct different interests other than on this data center." And obviously, like organizing coalitions of people with distinct interests other than the one you're working on, that is like literally what politics and organizing is, right? And the fact that we have this issue that has this vast spectrum of people, right? Ruby red, Trump districts, blue districts, rural farmers, urban people, people of every every race and background, all coming together and agreeing that we are not going to let these big tech billionaires come in and fuck over our communities and ratchet up our energy prices and use up all our water for no benefit to us. Like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for a wedge issue, for like this building of a bottom top polarization for working class people. And it's something that we should all be, I think, embracing, supporting, and figuring out how we can use this to really shake up politics in America, because it's not that often that you have all of these people coming together to say, fuck these billionaires, we're not going to let them fuck over our communities.
Yeah, Yasha Levine, I'm going to come to you because you've written about and you're working on as a multi-part series, or is it going to ultimately be a documentary about these data centers, particularly this largest cluster of data centers that's in Northern Virginia that you're calling Data Center Valley?
Yeah, or Data
Or
Center
Vampire
Alley.
Valley,
They
sorry.
call it. They call it. Yeah, I know. I made that slip of the tongue too. They call it themselves, like officially, North Virginia sort of bureaucrats that approve these things. They that's like a thing that they are proud of. Like, we live in Data Center Alley. Like, anyway, but yeah. No, I'm working on this. I'm actually working on a larger My name is Yasha Levine. I'm working on a larger documentary series. It's going to be multi-part. The first part is going to be about data centers, just because. For me, the data centers are kind of great, and like the fact that people are suddenly, focused on them and freaked out by them is because for me, data centers are the internet made real. Like, until really data centers, these massive hyperscale data centers, started popping up and being planned all around the country, like the internet has always been this abstract thing. Like, AI, in particular, is abstract thing, where Google, abstract things,
The
Facebook, all of these
cloud.
things. Yeah, it's the cloud. I mean, it was so abstract that they could pretend to hide it in heaven, essentially, right? It was like all this stuff just happens in heaven where all the angels are, right? And so,
Mm.
like, it's hard to get people to kind of understand that the internet is actual real physical infrastructure. It's super data hungry. It depends on, all of the kind of all these extractionary processes that are global, that all industrial infrastructure requires. You need to mine the earth. You need to to burn the fossil fuels for the energy. You need to fire up to make concrete. You need to lay down all these wires that are like encircling the world. But it was hard to see it because the wires are hidden, or they just look like wires. And the data centers, really up to now have been kind of like chill, I'd say, because
Yeah.
they'd be like these. I don't know. They'd be like a big warehouse or distribution center, and they might be noisy. They might have a lot of AC units on them, but they weren't they were there, but they weren't as aggressive as this new generation that's being, But so for me, it's like a perfect opportunity to look at these things, because it's like, look, this is the internet. And the more that the internet grows and the more powerful it becomes and the more that it sort of gobbles up our lives and mediates everything that we do, the bigger it'll actually become, and the more that it'll have an effect on you. And so for now, what's interesting about it is that, like, for a lot of people, I spoke to, people that when I went out to North Virginia, and it's like the first time. I mean, for the first time, I think people are really seeing the internet physically, right? And they're like, oh shit, this thing sucks. This thing is
And so
horrible.
what are they seeing? Because you make this interesting point that the optics, the look of data centers is different from your kind of classic factory with smokestacks that people might point at and say, I don't want to live near there. That's obviously spewing toxins into the air. This is an obvious kind of a health hazard. But that these kind of blend into the industrial architecture of many sort of corporate car park type places in the world. But you're saying now that there's a shift, that people are more aware. Is it because of the scale of these builds or something more substantive about how these new data centers are being built?
Yeah, I mean, I think they do blend in, and they still, even the new hyperscale ones in North Virginia, for instance, which is right outside of DC, right by the Dulles Airport. I mean, that whole area right by the Dulles Airport is, as far as I know, this is correct. It's the densest, has the densest collection of data centers in the world. Like, if you go and kind of get lost in the little cul-de-sacs and business parks there, like at some point you just realize you're just surrounded by data centers. They're like to the left, to the right, they're all around you, and then there's entire neighborhoods that are just, they look like a business park. Like they could look like people go to work there, or even like it could be like a hospital maybe or something, but it just looks weird because it's made to look like something like that. But what makes them stand out, and it's particularly this newer generation, is the gas turbines that data centers are increasingly using. I mean, even the ones that are connected to the power grid, where the power generation is happening somewhere else, like at a power plant. Those are loud, and depending on their size, and if they're like, they also sometimes use backup diesel generators when there's not enough power, or maybe so where there's power cutoffs. So even the older ones that are connected, or the ones that are connected to the power grid, they are still can be extremely loud and extremely polluting because they have these diesel giant backup generators that kick on from time to time. But now there's a new like version that's in North Virginia, and it's popping up everywhere. The data centers that powers Grok's Musk's Grok AI is like that. I mean, they are self-sufficient. They are essentially standalone gas turbine power plants. So there's gas delivered to these data centers, and they burn that gas in these giant, massive turbines that heat up to crazy temperatures, and they turn the wheel, and that like generates electricity that then powers these data centers. And powers like the cooling systems and all that stuff. So those things, they're not just loud; they also emit all of these pollutants, in the exhaust of that gas.
I don't know that I realized that. I mean, so much of the context around the data centers right now and how they're being covered is them sucking energy from neighboring areas, and we'll get to this. But in particular, that proposed data center in Utah that's bigger than God knows how many cities. You'll be specific when I ask you guys about that later. But I didn't realize that the energy demands are such that some of them are energy like power plants basically in and of themselves that are relying on gas turbines and that have all the downstream effects of those kinds of power plants.
Yeah, I mean, they have all the particular, matter that's sort of the exhaust. And here's the thing, because the data center is build out is so huge that, energy companies, public utilities are not able to meet the demand and to connect these data centers. But these companies that are building these data centers, some of them are being directly built by these, by Facebook or Meta and all this. And then there are like sort of third party kind of companies that build the data centers and then lease the infrastructure to clients, and they keep all that kind of confidential, so you don't really know. But there's so much demand for data centers that these companies are just going ahead and building, even when like the utility tells them, hey, a connection is like 5 years away. We can connect you to the grid, but we can't do it for another 5 years or longer. I mean, that's sort of their promise. So there's actually not enough like infrastructure and connections to connect these power centers, but the data centers, but they are going ahead and building these things. And they're not telling like the people in the communities that they're building that they're going to do that. When they're getting the approval process, they say that, oh yeah, we're going to have some backup generators here. But when they do build it, it suddenly turns out that, wait, they're like not only just a data center that is, has some diesel backup generators that kick in from time to time when there's like a power cut. No, they are actually, it's like across the street from you suddenly is a gas-powered power plant, like a massive one that runs 24 hours a day. The noise, you can see it. You can see the exhaust coming out of like, it's sort of, covered by this very tall fence to make it kind of pretty, but like everyone can hear it. Everyone can see it. You can smell it even. And so it is like the reason is because there's just not enough electricity to go around, and the energy companies can't hook these data centers up fast enough for demand. And so you have them essentially breaking off independently and doing this decentralized energy, gas powered energy infrastructure, on site. Yeah.
That's really
I just
helpful
have
background. Gosh, but before you get to come to you, Aaron, I want to make sure we get Edward in the conversation because he hasn't had an opportunity to introduce himself. Edward Ongweso Jr., introduce yourself to the audience, reintroduce yourself to the audience, and feel free to weigh in on any of that before I come back to you, Aaron.
Yeah, so my name is Edward Ongweso Jr. I'm a writer, researcher, focused mainly on Silicon Valley, on labor, finance, their intersections, co-host podcast This Machine Kills, which is mainly focused on political economy of tech. We spent, a few episodes actually honing in on the data center debate, largely inspired by Holly Buck's article, which I think that, as we were talking about earlier, it's just one article and it's not indicative of what a lot of people think. But I do think it is a very valuable article to get a sense of the limits of tech discourse and tech analysis on parts of the left, which is that, Buck's argument about why moratorium would be a disastrous policy to pursue and in terms of its impact on other people, but also why some sort of, cross coalition along class lines or along political lines is unsustainable, is an argument that I think falls apart, closely when you examine it. But specifically on, her argument where one reason why we can't do a moratorium, right, is because we will see an offshoring of artificial intelligence compute, I think is kind of a perfect encapsulation of why we actually do need the moratorium when we're thinking about how to intervene in the artificial intelligence build out, right? Because the reasons...
So to be clear, just to put a finer point in it for those who haven't read the article, her argument is that if we make it expensive to build or impossible to build data centers here, they'll just build them in, Bahrain or some other country, and people in the global south will bear the brunt of all of the negative impacts we're discussing right now.
Yeah.
A similar argument that's made, in the environmental space with respect to, any environmental measure that has us simply exporting the toxic manufacture of various goods to other parts of the world where there's
just to illustrate it, like I had an oil lobbyist in Bakersfield tell me that if we stop fracking in America, we're going to be, subsidizing regimes that kill gays and women abroad because, and like that's basically the argument, that it's just if you stop fracking, you have the blood of all these, people.
It's always gays and women. Yeah. Why are we always in this?
I don't know.
Make your argument without gays and women.
You're going to be, sorry about that, but you're going to die if we stop fracking, that's how it goes.
If you actually look at, what is the reason why we're not going to offshore? I mean, most of the compute in the world is built in the United States, and it's built in the United States or in the United States client states for very specific reasons, right? There's geopolitical reasons, which is that, we're going around trying to build explicitly, as the State Department issued in December of last year, this sort of packed silica, right? We want to build a global order where we have a dependency regime where we have full control over the supply chains for chips, for talent, for minerals, and for infrastructure, and our client states and, our allies and whoever else wants to deal in compute has to rely on the United States or enter sort of subservient relationship that can be supported with economic force or economic coercion and military force. But there's also financial arrangements, right, that are unique to the United States. There's grid requirements where, frankly, a lot of even the United States grid, despite the abundance of, you would think of natural gas and hydrocarbon infrastructure to power some of these things, still can't actually meet the demand of data centers that are trying to be built out here. And the other countries definitely are still unable to meet that demand themselves. You have the literal geography of some of the inputs, right, where chips and other inputs at the highest level of trying to create the artificial intelligence infrastructure can only be made in some very specific places in Taiwan and South Korea, and attempts to bring that production elsewhere, like in the United States, have largely faltered, right? And all of these are just some of the reasons why you're never going to have an actual offshoring if you impose a moratorium. But there are also reasons why, if we do have one, this gives us tools to intervene on large questions that we're already been trying to struggle with, right? How do we build out the grid in a way that is just and is also sustainable? How do we build out, how do we do some reforms and rein in the excess of speculative, capital that is threatening to ruin the economy with a bubble if AI demand does not go as far as some of these firms are expecting it to. How can we use moratorium to also, provide a damper on some of the attempts to militarize artificial intelligence and this technology that the United States is playing a role in building this sort of global order that supports waning American power. I mean, if you are interested, if you're a leftist, you should be interested in these questions, right? And a moratorium is, or at least a credible threat of one, is one of the tools that we should have in our toolkit to, check these sort of developments. And so, but the inability, I think, to connect it to that, or to see it in the geopolitical lens, or to see it, or to recognize that it's not going anywhere, I think is downstream of an analysis we're seeing in some parts of, the liberal left analysis of tech, which is just more or less repeating big tech talking points.
Well, but that's
right?
what's so confusing, because this wasn't a liberal left publication. I mean, people have been keep track of it. But for what it's worth, it's supposed to be one of our flagship.
You don't want to get a sectarian war going.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying that I think that, over the years, the left has, there have been a lot of debates about how to think about tech, but they're not actually about these larger questions, which is like, clearly we're going to be using tech to create expansive and automated kill chains in the Middle East. Clearly we're going to use tech to subordinate the Gulf into a specific relationship with us. Clearly we're going to use tech to bolster surveillance. Instead, they've largely been, trying to, how can we apply 20th century analyses of the manufacturing sector to the data center build out? How can we apply solutions to the social democratic crisis of, how do we provide for people to what's going to happen next if artificial intelligence devastates the labor market, right? And these, I think it's not a coincidence that we don't really have proposals at the same time that people who are on the left can say something as insane as, well, you can't oppose them at all. You're going to scare them. You need to make a nice safe space for capital.
Can I add something? Sorry, go ahead,
Aaron. I know you've been champing at the bit.
Go ahead, Aaron. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just to underline what Ed was saying, I mean, like, to put a point on it, as Yasha was describing, like, we don't have the capacity and infrastructure here. The idea that, like, they have it in Guatemala or whatever, and so like it's pretty laughable. But just even putting that aside, like, the facts, just conceptually, that argument, the piece that we need to be wary of proposals that would send burdens to elsewhere, that is tantamount to saying you must let the ruling class hurt you because otherwise they might hurt someone else less privileged than you, right? That what Yasha said about the fracking thing, right? And that is an argument against any jurisdiction passing any pro-social regulation at all, ever, right? It is an extremely convenient paradigm for the forces of capital. And I think just to reiterate what Ed was saying, but a little bit meaner, because that's sometimes my role. Like, I don't think there's a debate here on the left. I think there are, like, a couple of techno-optimist voices that have, like, sort of carved out their niches as, like, the left techno-optimists who don't actually have a constituency, but they are very extremely convenient voices for capital. And so capital keeps coming back, and there keeps being these moments where there's a concern, there's a backlash to tech things, and then we have a couple voices spouting the talking points of big tech or of other, corporate advocacy points. And I don't think we should give it that much mind.
Yeah, no, I totally.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I just want to add, because I think this is important. I mean, this is that article, and all of its sort of arguments are extremely undemocratic. I mean, it's anti-democratic. I mean, it spits in the face of a truly organic, democratic sort of movement that's emerging in America to oppose these things. I mean, it's really, no one's driving. There are no consultants driving this thing. It's all grassroots. It's all local to whatever the proposals are happening in their towns and cities and rural areas and counties and in our incorporated communities. Wherever those data centers are. It's like the definition of a small d democratic movement that's happening around, opposition to these data centers. It's like rooted in community. Frequently, if you look at it, frequently, or if not always, these data centers are put in communities that are, that aren't wealthy. Just to put it nicely, they are frequently, even in like the case of like North Virginia, the zip code that they're going into, or the county that they're going, parts of the county that it's going into. I mean, it's in this data center alley is in the richest county in America. Loudoun County is like the richest county in America, right? And yet, like even in that richest county, and there's a lot of diversity in wealth and income, and it's going into like the most, the poorest part of the county. So it's always, and so the people that are opposing this, it's a democratic, it's affecting, people who are poor and impoverished, or poorer and have less power. So it's like it's a classic kind of democratic insurgency to have, a socialist basically say, hey, stop your democratic movement. You must stop democratic movement against basically an unchecked oligarchic technocracy, like just because because compute might cost a little bit more down the line. I mean, that's another thing. It's like, oh, this is going to increase the costs of of like the tokens that you buy to do your AI stuff. And it's like, wait, so poor people can't afford tokens now because you won't be able to build enough data centers for them? I mean, just it's like it
Which,
is.
by the way, these companies are not like operating at cost, right? Like they're
no, it's all
it is a bubble.
Yeah.
What they are charging has nothing to do with the actual like costs and inputs right now, because they're not building a sustainable business model.
It's like,
one thing I just want to just like a proof point for what you were just saying. I live in sort of environmental, climate, green NGO world, and this like claim that this is like coming from the green NGO people, like I think in a lot of orgs, this organic uprising of American people across the country kind of came as a surprise. And there are orgs now that are like, oh, great, can we support? Can we jump in? But they're kind of playing catch up. And it was like, this did not happen from nonprofit, progressive nonprofits. This was happening on the ground. And now, and progressive nonprofits were like largely pretty late to get at the game and understand, oh, maybe we should be trying to help these people.
Yeah, let me, just for people again who haven't read the article, I want to quote a little bit back to the audience, because it does feel, it's not a kind of a throwaway aside. It's a significant argument that she makes in this piece, that the people who are opposing this, it almost feels like she's trying to pre-bias folks against the initiative by smearing the character and the type of people who are opposing data centers in the same way that is sort of like Crunchy Lib, who has a in this house we coexist a sign in their front yard, can be used to sort of pillory the left and incline people against whatever they're for. And in fact, she literally evokes those lawn signs in this piece. She writes, the irony is that a lot of organizing to stop data centers is coming from wealthier communities and groups, always groups, who tend to have greater power to organize. True, we lack a rigorous study of this. So
I'm bullshitting, making up. Yep.
But, right.
but given the geography of data centers in the United States, with clusters in more affluent suburbs of Northern Virginia or Columbus, Ohio, and a broader expansion into surrounding areas where incentives and available land have given rise to large buildouts, thus far, many appear to be sited in non-disadvantaged communities. Much of the resistance has been organized by the environmental movement, with Food and Water Watch convening a letter with 230 groups. There's a narrative of vulnerable communities standing up to big industries, illustrated by cases that do fit this model, like XAI's exploitation and air pollution at its South Memphis data center. However, the reality on the ground and in the anti-data center Facebook groups, points to a more complicated picture. AI data centers face a left-right opposition as likely to boast Gadsden flags as "in this house" yard signs. So it does.
No DSA signs there. Yeah. No.
Right. It does. I mean, I don't want to like personalize this unnecessarily. Like I said, Holly has been on the show before. I would be happy to have her back to have her moot, and defend her position here. I should say that the last time she was on, she was talking about another controversial area and right-coded area of climate science, geoengineering. But why? What? Like, is anyone willing to sort of put a finer point on what they think is going on here, both with Holly writing this piece and Jacobin's choice to publish it?
I think part of it is, as we kind of been talking about, there's this idea that, and I understand it, that the techno-optimist perspective and framework is one worth pursuing and exploring because the project thus far has been, or it might feel like the project thus far on the left has been to largely do a negative project and to just critique and point out issues with the way that we're developing technology today.
But is that
But I
even
mean,
true?
but that's
Because
not true.
the Green New Deal, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I mean, yeah, that's what I agree. It's not true. I think that what it is there's been an increasing refusal to accept the idea that technological progress is an unalloyed good, and that this complicates ideas about what to actually do with technology. For example, to go back to the moratoria, right? I mean, it is easier, and I understand why, to say, okay, well, like a moratorium may fall apart or fail, and we can maybe intervene at a different level, which will yield some sort of political concessions legislatively, or maybe if we back the right candidates, or maybe if we pitch some sort of compact that will create some new social contract, whatever the hell, right? But the thing that I feel like keeps getting or missed, even in some of the debates about the moratorium, is like we can use that immediately to just change the discussion. Like, okay, if there's a threat of one, we can start talking about ways to actually rein in capital markets that are not being talked about right now in the techno-optimist framework. And or we can talk about ways to rein in, or to develop the grid in certain ways, or to put hard lines for ratepayer protections, or to shift, or to cost shift, right? So that if a bubble bursts or if rates jump up suddenly, it doesn't fall on individuals in the working class. It falls on the companies and their lenders. But I think the techno-optimist framework is almost more excessively, focused on the benefits that could be accrued to someone from access. But what does it matter? I don't. If my utility bill goes up $100 a month, I don't need an AI tutor. I need like a lower utility bill.
And I think the thing about the left and technology, I think the constructive role for the left when it comes to technology is bringing the political economy into the conversation and saying you can't actually separate the technology from the political economy. Like AI could be a lot of things. There could be a lot of ways that this was being developed and used and deployed. AI, as it currently exists, as it's currently designed and deployed, is a very specific thing, right? It is a thing that is being done by a small number of big tech billionaires and firms in ways that are all about consolidating power for those billionaires and firms, increasing their decision-making authority over every aspect of our lives. And that is that's not the way AI would have to be. Like, we could actually be using this stuff to try to cure cancer or whatever, but that is the way that it, in this current system, that it is. And I think the role for the left is to talk about that, and that what these left techno-optimists don't do is ever bring in the political economy.
If I go
ahead.
No, okay. Well, I just want to add, because I do think, I mean, just to answer your question, because I've actually, it's funny. I was just talking to the author of a new book called Progress, about the history of the idea of progress and how it's been, how we've all grown up in it, and it's kind of a powerful idea, and usually the hitching of technology and frequently empires and these, the vast bureaucratic states that are kind of, take territory and spread around the world, with the idea of progress and, to conquer the barbarians, to conquer the savages. And then we use, we bring in advanced technologies and we make the world better. I mean, I think on the left, it's this idea that technological development is a progressive issue is not really that, it's not, people aren't like looking at it closely and trying to break it apart and to see actually what it's made out of, and actually if this is really true. I mean, I think that piece in Jacobin by Holly Buck represents the extreme version of this sort of techno. It's like what is it? Eco, not modernist. It's like what are they? I'm trying to remember what the.
Are you thinking eco-modernist?
Eco-modernism, yes. The idea of that like all we really need is to just unleash AI, and then that the people control. And that then, this will usher in a world of fully automated luxury communism, where everything is distributed fairly, where we have unlimited free time, where we can just, pursue human potential and just do whatever we want. You know, that's like a vision of a future that a lot of people, I think, on the left and do have, and it actually tracks very closely with the vision, that Elon Musk has. Except with in Musk's world, he controls it. In like the sort of the eco-modernist world, it's like the people control it, or the bureaucrats that represent the interests of the people control.
Yeah, but Yasha, I would say that it doesn't feel to me, again, I'm going on vibes just like Holly Buck, but it doesn't feel to me that there's actually any constituency on the left that feels that way. There might have been at a time where George Jetson was like the vision of the future. But these days, perhaps precisely because so many of the leading figures in this AI space are right-leaning. We're sitting behind Donald Trump at his inauguration, having given hundreds of millions of dollars to his campaign, are the Elon Musks and the Alec Karps, who are very openly talking about how everyone's going to become unemployed and you got to bend the knee. That there's I don't know that I've ever met anybody on any side of the aisle who has a lot of optimism about where AI is going to bring us. And it's worth reading into the record, as it were, that there's this Gallup poll that's made a lot of news that 7 out of 10 Americans oppose the construction of data centers for AI in their local area. There seems to be little to no constituency for this.
Yes.
Which also brings me, I want to bring in, before we get too far down into the details of AI in particular, that the Holly Buck approach has echoes in this other viral New York Times piece that came out a week or so ago, titled "Democrats Don't Have to Campaign on Climate Anymore" by Matt Huber. Did you guys catch this piece?
Yeah.
No, I didn't, but I can understand it. I can pretty much guess the argument that Matt Huber is making.
And I have a response piece coming out in Jacobin, because why not?
Okay, amazing. So I'll come to you next, Aaron. Then, but notably to me, in the course of making this argument, he talks about how the green movement is unpopular, that the Green New Deal didn't really catch on, that Joe Biden didn't get any credit for the climate aspects of his infrastructure deal, and that people are talking about green issues more in the way that they do as an affordability issue, and that therefore you don't have to talk about climate. Now, I found this article to be confusing because, if anything, it should be framed as, wow, left candidates have figured out more effective ways to talk about climate issues. Or environmental issues. They were always affordability issues, and it's great that they're being specific in their framing now in a way that resonates with the public, as opposed to just sort of like Al Greening this, like it's 1996. But it's specifically framed as, climate, it shouldn't be as big of an issue. And one of the arguments he makes is one that Holly makes, which is that environmentalism has been the province of bourgeois liberals. It's the Brahmin left, he says, that have been interested in this. And therefore, it's kind of tainted and not a real working class issue. And therefore, we should let it go. These two articles together have me thinking that there's a broader plot afoot. I'm sorry, maybe 2 is too few for a conspiracy.
Well, yeah,
but it does
the eco-modernists.
Trends.
They're both from the same school, of eco-modernism and fully automated luxury communism. The idea that like you can just create utopia by just taking over this technology that's sort of the AIs and using it for maximum public good. I mean so they are super pro tech, and they just have they think they can basically nationalize, Elon Musk's, server, Grok server, and put it to use in, giving working class people a break. I mean, that's kind of what their idea is.
Sure. I mean, but Yasha,
and I think there is
who's written a response. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right, Brianna, that there is a larger conspiracy here. And I think it's worth putting this into the context of corporate Democrats have spent the last year and a half trying to deflect blame for their party's 2024 losses, away from themselves towards their ideological opponents. And Democratic commitment to climate action has been like a key target of these factional attacks. We've had multiple corporate aligned groups like Welcome Pack and Searchlight Institute issue these reports and calls for Democrats to stop talking about climate. There was just this like centrist convening in Canada that was last week. Senator Alyssa Slotkin from Michigan said during that conference, quote, the average American is going to struggle to care about climate change if they can't figure out how to pay their rent. So there's this like clear narrative
that's so dirty. That's so messed up. Using climate as a cudgel like that is so messed up.
Because Kamala Harris,
they're not connected.
Kamala Harris didn't mention rising rents because she was obsessed with the Green New Deal and kept talking about climate, right? So I think it is worth understanding this sort of like climate scapegoating interest that the corporate side of the party has, right? Like you have to be assuming for that analysis to make sense, you have to assume that climate action is deeply unpopular among Americans and that Democrats consistently put climate at the center of their messaging. Neither of those assumptions is true at all, right?
Not.
So one, Democrats are not talking about climate, right? Kamala Harris barely mentioned it. We called the climate bill the Inflation Reduction Act, right? It has been well reported that Harris was pushed to de-emphasize her affordability agenda by corporate advisors and Wall Street donors, right? It wasn't climate activists who were saying, stop talking about this stuff. But two, it's worth really stressing that climate action is actually very popular among Americans. There was a recent Gallup poll that found climate concern at an all-time high. There's a 2025 Pew Research poll that found a majority of Americans believe climate change is a major threat in the United States. Only 19% believe it's not a threat. Clean energy is extremely popular. So there are huge political opportunities for the Democratic Party to be talking about climate change in ways that do a great contrast with Republicans, right? Like you can say we are trying to build clean energy. They're trying to keep coal plants running that cost us more. We're trying to have big oil pay for the disasters that they cause. They're trying to make working families pay for it. These are not complicated ideas. And the last thing I just say is like, even if that weren't true, it would be fucked up to say we shouldn't talk about climate.
Yes, because you wrote a piece about this already, right? Where did you? I read something by you, Aaron. Did I not write it down on one of your Substacks or your blog? Yeah.
I've written pieces about the. I've written about there's lots of political opportunities, but even just putting that aside, I think like we know we need climate action if we're not going to like have our civilization end, and it's not actually possible to do that at the scope and scale we need if we're going to just do it obliquely, right? Like, like whether we talk about climate or not, Fox News and the Koch network and the fossil fuel industry is going to keep trying to polarize around it, and so.
Yeah, and the point, one of you wrote an article that I read for this that was made is that, yes, all of the reasons why these polls are being misconstrued, just because climate isn't the top issue and you can make the case that it's the fourth or fifth issue doesn't mean that it's not popular, to your point, Aaron. But also there's like this moral point where you shouldn't just follow polls everywhere they lead. Republicans do something called like public persuasion. And when there's a moral imperative at your back, because you don't want to ruin the entire planet and have us all die, from a climate apocalypse, then you need to be explaining to the public why it is that they should be behind X, Y, and Z thing. I mean, using working class issues. If the takeaway from Zohran Mamdani's win and Bernie's popularity is that, okay, you have to center the working class. But what they do is they use the working class the way they used to use race as a cudgel against progressive policies. I mean, working class people don't prioritize climate change, and so neither should we, is the new, breaking up the banks cure racism.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, also just, and I've stopped talking about polling, but factually incorrect, right? Polling has repeatedly shown that more Latino, Black, and lower income people say climate change is important to their vote than rich white people do. Yeah. So just on every level.
Forget the polls, though, because the data center, the insurgency, the grassroots insurgency against data centers is a real world manifestation of this fact. You don't need a poll to tell you that. Look, when you have, because look, the problem with all this climate change is it's extremely abstract to a lot of people, and it's not clear what it is. I mean, people kind of understand it, but how do you interface with it? And if you are worried about paying the bills, and if you are worried about things in your day-to-day life. With the data center is it brings not only the internet is made real, but it is, climate change made real. It is energy policy made real. It is really like the entire political system of the society made real, because suddenly, you as someone, let's say, who's, look, for a lot of people who are living in these rural areas where these climate, or suburban areas where these data centers are being put up, they may own their home, or they own the home that their family has owned for, some generations or whatever. And it's like the only store of wealth that, Americans have pretty much is equity in their home. A data center comes to your neighborhood, that equity just drops to zero. Nobody wants to live next to one of these things. So number one, it's like, so then you're like, wait, why am I being sacrificed for, for the greater good of AI, so we can all, generate like, basically, porn image and whatever. And like, and give kids psychosis, and like, and guide people through suicide, and and mass murder.
The populace, like Searchlight, etc. It's fun. Like when it comes to data centers and AI, we need to think about the greater good. Yeah, they're unpopular. Yeah, that these plebes don't understand it, but we need to think. But then when it comes to climate change, literally having a livable future, even though they're wrong about the popularity, it's like, oh no, we need to chase the voters. It's just the.
I get it, yeah, but because exactly, but I mean, but it is the one reason I think that a lot of these kind of democratic or democratic adjacent, or sort of these kind of bureaucratic minded people, even on the left, kind of are upset or fear this data center insurgency against the data center, is because it's not a one issue thing. It's like it combines all of these different sort of things that are actually ailing society in a massive way, and in a way the data center embodies all of them. The unequal redistribution of wealth, the unequal redistribution of who gets to be sacrificed for future prosperity, who gets to share in that prosperity. What does it even mean? Like what does a job mean? Like when you are when you're talking about automating people's livelihoods out of existence and saying that's progress. Like it brings in all these kind of philosophical questions that are actually quite important. If you're going to have a functioning democracy, these things need to be talked about. Like, what is the value of a job? What is the value? What is a citizen? What are we here for? Like, what is life for? Is it just to work so I can pay, my bills? I mean,
what's our vision? What's the vision for the society?
Yeah, it does throw everything kind of into the blender. And I think because of that, and it includes all of these different things, and it unites people, across, kind of cuts through all the cultural bullshit, that people have been completely zombified by, basically issues that don't really matter to you. You've been like, just as like, as everyone here on the stream knows, it's like everyone is like psyoped, to hate each other, to be divided over these. Okay, maybe they have some value, but they're ultimately secondary issues, even if secondary. And yet, like, I was talking to a friend of mine who went to one of these anti-data center meetings in outside of Chicago. And it was interesting because there were all of these kind of Trump supporters and Democrats and people who you don't know what they believe in. And then when someone like, and there was no politics, there was no party, I mean, there was politics, but there was no party politics involved. And then when someone started talking about something, I think it was like a Trump guy started talking about something, like something political, they said like about Trump or about the Democrats. People shouted them down and said, "Don't bring politics into this." So for people, that's how brainwashed, people are. They think politics is basically, are you a Republican or are you a Democrat? Are you a liberal or are you MAGA? That's politics to them. Opposing a data center, that's, being proposed and, being pushed through by some oligarchy, that's not politics. That's just, I don't know, normal, but the people are engaging in the political process, like actually in trying to like get away from the duopoly and like the culture war stuff. So it's like maybe, it is possibly like the data center thing. I don't want to be, too grandiose about this, but it is possibly the most significant political movement, since the populists that tried to like stop the oligarchic takeover America, by the railroads and the Wall Street. I'm talking about this, in the 19th century, right? Mm-hmm. So the populist movement, anybody who wants to engage in populist politics, or I highly recommend people read this book called The Populist Moment by Lawrence Goodwin. It is like the last truly democratic political movement in America of these rural farmers from the South that basically already were impoverished and were, and what they saw was their livelihood totally being controlled by the emergence of railroads and like this financial oligarchy, that they were dictating, transportation costs. They were totally controlling, all the finance and all and there was an attempt to, like fight it, and they were crushed. They were kind of like the Luddites they're like the American Luddites, essentially. And it's pretty interesting. And it's like, because you're opposing not just like a niche political issue, but you're opposing a kind of something that affects everyone, whether or not you live next to a data center. You don't have to live next to a data center to feel the effects of a data center, because that stuff goes in your school, it's in your workplace, it's in the environment, it's changing the politics, it's centralizing power. So like the people who are fighting this stuff on the front lines of where they're being built, in a way they're doing it for everybody. It's just that not everybody's not like, on the front lines and being affected directly. But it is such a democratic thing.
Which is why it feels like they're being so explicit in trying to wine bomb this and use class politics, ironically, as a cudgel. I want to talk about something that came up a little while ago, the why of why these are being built. Because the way that it's being framed by, Holly Buck and others who are pro data center, maybe what are we calling it, techno-optimists or what have you, is that all these benefits are going to accrue to all of us. It's going to solve cancer. It's going to allow you to have legal defense that you might not otherwise afford, that it's going to be a kind of equalizer for folks with fewer means. But there's another group of people who are ringing a certain alarm bell that says we shouldn't even be calling these data centers. We should be calling them surveillance centers, because the reason that they're being built in this quantity at this moment is because there's a ratcheting up of surveillance technology, an understanding that this is the new war footing, that Israel is a testing ground for how wars are going to be fought going forward. The analogy being, of course, not an actual war, but the genocide in Gaza, and that we should be opposing these not just on the basis of the environmental harms that are going to accrue, but also because there's going to be a mass reforming of society where surveillance is going to be able to be used and drone technology is going to be used to keep us in line when the typical sort of structure of people staying in line because they have jobs and they have homes and they have investment in the system goes out the window because of mass automation.
Yeah.
And all of the social ills and poverty that are likely to accrue.
I mean, you can go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think a lot about how when it was first revealed that Israel was using pretty advanced, and trying to create advanced automated workflows or human machine workflows where you would just pretty much have a 2-second compress as much human supervision as possible for automating assassination, and using that to justify larger and larger and larger kill lists and larger attacks and bombardment of civilians. In the artificial intelligence sector, there are these people, these exorist people who insist that the existential risk of humanity being made extinct by artificial intelligence should be managed either with a pause on the development, but not on the build out of it in some corners, because the build out will be necessary for the beneficial elements, whereas a pause or guardrails would be necessary to just ensure that we get there. And then deafening silence on these sort of issues, right? On the question of the fact that we are developing or having, allies of ours develop incredibly advanced ways to compress, surveil, target, categorize people to make it as cheap as possible, using them in the genocide of Palestinians, using them in the Iran war, using them increasingly they're going to be used in other proxy conflicts that we're going to have in the coming years. It is so obvious that if you're interested in slowing the militarization of this technology, the way to do that is not to develop an even more lethal version of this technology, as is being claimed by Palantir, for example, and most of Silicon Valley, right? That we have to develop the frontier of this technology so that we can create, a situation where no one else is going to use these weapons, and so that we can then force a settlement. All right. The actual thing is to intervene in the country where most of the compute, most of the financing of the compute, and most of the political arrangements around the compute are being formulated. And that's the United States, right? But this is why I feel like, to Yasha's point, the data centers are a lever. They're downstream. They're emblematic of the political economy we have, right? Which is where most of the resources are being invested in. How is it that we can maximize rentiers or support rentiers as much as possible? How is it that we can, use surveillance either for social control or use it to gain more insight into consumers so that we can, squeeze out something else, whether that's having prices that, automate themselves because they're surveilling the individual, or whether that's figuring out ads that are targeted exactly to you. How is it that we can get you to stay on the platforms as long as possible so that we can, generate as much value for this individual as possible? How can we create new products and services that use these automated these AI tools and these AI chatbots or these generative AI products that we figure out down the line. This is not I think that articulating part of the problem is we need to articulate what vision we have that goes beyond simply saying, these AI could be used for solving cancer, solving, for example, problems and trying to figure out how to fold or discover certain molecules or compounds so that we can create new pharmacological products so that we can, solve cancer, do other, biotech innovations. And instead saying, okay, what kind of society do we actually want where we have some sort of technology that could conceivably automate or assist or augment human labor? And how can we design it in ways that are not just what the interest of these firms are, which is, creating a chatbot or companion that is, seductive and appears to be human. But none of these questions, of course, are going to get developed so long as the driving momentum is we need to develop this for the AI firms that are using debt financing to build out this build out, who are desperately trying to break or privatize large swaths of the grid so that they can get it online and build it in a way that's insulated from regulatory infrastructure, who are trying to figure out how to get the talent, the minerals, the chips into their own sort of business empires in ways that are either subsidized by or supported by the state, and then figure out customers for it. And if it's not going to be the people, then it will be militaries, police departments, right, or other corporations across the world.
And in fact, there's a piece that Derek Seidman had in Truth Out just recently about the build out of data centers, private equity financed data centers on U.S. military land. For the operation of, and there's line it's data centers are war infrastructure now.
I mean,
that is like very much,
it's explicit.
Yeah, I mean, Can I just finish because I feel like I have a little to add just because I wrote a book about how the internet emerged out of the Vietnam War. And this isn't a new thing. Like, okay, with the AI targeting, everyone probably knows here, like the target, using AI to target, as in the laboratory of Gaza by Israel to assassinate, with the help of Google to do that, the contracted Google Lavender, and then earlier the Project Maven is in the American one with the automated drones that fly around. I mean, there are all of these things that are disclosed and undisclosed. I mean, this really goes back. I mean, the internet and basically all computer technology really is about surveillance and control, and centralizing control over modern societies. I mean, the original computer was literally built to count people and to study the U.S. population for the U.S. Census Bureau. I mean, the first punch card tabulator was contracted by the Census Bureau back when it was actually increasingly concerned about the racial makeup of immigration into America. This is when immigrants from Eastern Europe, from Southern Europe were coming into America, and the kind of the Anglo elites that ran this country were beating the drums, saying there's this country is going to be a degenerate country. They're diluting their gene pool. There are these degenerate races, and like there was this kind of panic and.
In the Holocaust,
part of that
right?
panic.
Wasn't IBM doing the counting
that's much
during
later.
that?
I'm talking about 1890. I'm talking about so IBM actually came out of the company that developed the company that developed. It was called the Hall of Tabulators that developed it for the U.S. Census in 1890 became IBM. And yes, that same technology was contracted by the Nazis to improve some of their functioning in terms of their machine of genocide and mass murder. So all of these things, and then you flash forward, some of the earliest computers that were working in America that IBM also built were about air defense and tracking and automating sort of radar defense, NORAD and all this stuff. At the same time that they were trying to do the same thing and building surveillance system in Vietnam to fight against Vietnamese fighters, to try to penetrate the jungle cover through these like wireless sensors. Computers that IBM was also building at the time during the Vietnam War. And so you have this kind of trajectory where, and then, Google was famously partially funded by basically a security state, U.S. government security state grant that had buy-in from, believe the NSA, the FBI, and it was actually about creating search engines that could allow law enforcement to better search the internet, because the law enforcement had the same problem that consumers did. The internet was a giant kind of chaotic place, and it was very difficult to find anything. So it was Google came out, and other actually early search engines, I believe Alta Vista at the time. I mean, anyone who's old enough to know what Alta Vista is, I congratulate you for making it this far. Is all of this stuff has been there's always been the consumer side to it, and there's always been the military and kind of social control side to it. And in fact, if you think about consumerism, it is social control, because you're trying to, influence the consumer. You're trying to control the consumer. You're trying to make the consumer want things that they don't really want or didn't think they needed until you targeted them for that. So it really is, computer technology really is about social control and political control.
That's a good point. But I want to.
Can I push back on something?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Go ahead.
Just FYI, Yasha has to go at 5, and I want to make sure I have an opportunity to play a couple of clips before he goes. But go ahead, Aaron.
I can stay a little bit longer.
Kind of brief.
It's okay. I can stay a little bit longer.
Well, I would just say really briefly. I think you know that history. I think it is like. I mean, I'm a Luddite sort of personally, but I think politically it's important that we have an alternative vision for technology, and I think it's important that we are able to say this world we live in now, like this isn't how it has to be. Like there could be a use for this technology that wasn't just about facilitating rental price fixing with RealPage and surveilling workers in the Amazon factory and creating this dystopian thing for immigrant surveillance and everything. I think there is another way if we had a different political economy, which we don't. So you could say, what the fuck are you talking about? But I just think the answer for when you're talking to people is not we shouldn't have technology. It's that there another way is possible. The world we live in now is very contingent, and it's been built by these billionaire motherfuckers.
Well, yeah,
but we could push back.
I mean, look, I'll just tell you this, all right? Just because I actually was born in the Soviet Union, so I have a kind of an interesting perspective on this. I'm I'm very deeply sort of supportive of the spirit of the Soviet project. But I will just tell you this: when you have a technology, right, and you have these kind of centralized bureaucracies. I mean, we can get into this debate and talk about it forever, but technologies have a kind of a politics.
Sorry.
I know. Technologies kind of have a politics built into it, and they sort of systems that create technologies. These technologies have a way of kind of shackling society and making it kind of unable to get out of that technology. One is, for instance, the car and the highway created the suburb, and the suburb is like a shackle on America. It forecloses it makes alternatives or building alternatives societies and futures much more difficult. And so I'd say, yes, of course, you want to have a positive vision of how you can use technology. But, we don't have to whitewash the history of computer technology as it exists today, because the entire infrastructure that we're using now was developed by the Pentagon, including the personal computer, the smartphone. All of that technology was funded by the Pentagon, as for tools of basically command and control, allowing the military to command and to control, and to make sure that those commands are carried out, to watch the world, to control the world, all these things. So that's the origins of technology, and it's going to have a kind of an effect on how it interfaces with society, because technologies have a certain architecture, and that architecture has power over society, and so. But I agree with you. I mean, it's technology. We're human beings. We use technology. We make things. We're inventive. That's kind of who we are. And so.
Okay. So I take both of your point, but if I can redirect us for a second.
Let's do it. Of course.
I tried earlier to Google some information about the person who was setting fire to data centers, and much to my surprise, I had a really hard time pulling anything up. I couldn't remember the person's name. I couldn't remember where it happened. But when I put into the Google search engine, set fire to data centers, nothing was coming up. and I found it to be very suspicious.
You got the FBI knocking on your door. Yeah.
I couldn't even read about it. Eventually, I got an article from MarketWise titled "The AI Data Center Rebellion is Growing Fast and Getting Violent. What Investors Need to Know." And I was shocked to learn that the framing of that article was
hilarious.
not at all sympathetic to the reason why somebody would oppose data centers. Now, I want to play a clip. This has been a running theme on this show, that someone who does not share our politics, but who has a very big platform, keeps kind of hitting home runs on his platform, talking about issues that I wish had gone more mainstream. That man's name is Tucker Carlson. I apologize in advance. I want to play you a clip of Tucker Carlson taking a anti-data center approach on his show.
Yeah.
But consider the concern. So if you're rolling out what they're telling you, and clearly they believe, is the single greatest technological change in the history of human life on this planet, it's the biggest thing that's ever happened, ever, then you think one of your main concerns would be, well, does this change the relationship of the powerless to the powerful, the relationship of the citizen to the state, for example? One of your concerns would be, how do we do this and bring about the prosperity that it promises without totally eliminating human rights, making people slaves? Because we're against slavery, right? Aren't we against slavery? We were. How do we do that? But that doesn't seem to be Larry Fink's main concern. His main concern is, how do we protect our investment, this infrastructure, these buildings, these data centers? Someone could drone them. Someone could drone them. Now who? Foreign actors? Hezbollah? Hamas? No, just people. Larry Fink is concerned that ordinary American citizens, as he just said, will use $3,000 drones to destroy these billion-dollar investments. Why would he be worried about that? We've had electricity for over 100 years. There are 11,000 power plants in.
Okay. I have a second clip to play where he's going head to head with Kevin O'Leary, who's, and we'll get into this, trying to build this data center in Utah that's twice the size of Manhattan. But first, reactions to, are you surprised at all by Tucker Carlson sort of getting on this anti-data center train?
Tucker Carlson earns his keep, right? He knows that's right now Democrats and Republicans, I think broadly, at least at the party level, are struggling with or reluctant to go against, loudly at least, the core of the party or the leadership of the party data centers, partly because either they're scared of the Death Star of PAC funding that the Silicon Valley has accumulated, and some of the political operators they have working on their lobbying infrastructure, working on their political campaigns, crushing candidates who say anything about AI data centers, as they did for crypto. But I think part of it is, they're interested in trying to figure out a way to work with them, right? I still think that at the end of the day, a lot of Democrats, a lot of Republicans do not fundamentally see big tech, Silicon Valley, and this sort of AI infrastructure build out as a threat to themselves. And I do believe that they will be able to weather out a storm, or any sort of populist storm that comes. And if not, co-opt it, I think, much in the way of the language we've been seeing from the piece from Huber, but also others, where it's like, okay, these post-2024 pieces where it's like, we tried the coalition, we tried articulating a vision for society, it didn't work. We need to pull and work on very specific levers that give people crumbs, while we are advocating for largely hewing to the status quo, whether that's for technological development or anything else, right?
Tucker's very good at seeing a vacuum and filling it. And there, as Ed said, there's a vacuum right now, and it's like, when there's a vacuum like this, it's extremely dangerous, because you can have white supremacists step in to fill them if they're smart.
Let's go ahead and play the next clip with Kevin O'Leary.
Some of it, so you correct me. There was a referendum among citizens, or did some county board vote?
We actually went through the whole process that you have to do by their laws, and were granted 3-0. The commissioners of the county said, we want to be part of this. 3 people
voted. The people of the county.
They're elected officials. That's how you do it.
How hard is it for Kevin O'Leary and Amazon and Microsoft and Google to subvert 3 county commissioners in rural Utah?
Tucker, they asked us to come. They asked us to bring $15 billion. They asked and they voted, and it was a 3-0 vote. That's how it got done. There's no other way to do it.
Google and Kevin O'Leary got 3 county commissioners in rural Utah on their side. Good work. But can I just ask you really quick, like, why don't you have a referendum? Why don't you let all citizens, all taxpayers, the ones who are paying for your project, why don't they get to pay or vote?
Well, listen, the whole idea of expediting it was so the project didn't go to Jacksonville, Mississippi. That's the competition. And so the government there said, okay, look, we've done, because we haven't lost our,
when Tucker says like, oh yeah, Jacksonville, Mississippi at the end, I was like, this man is like 2 minutes away from saying like, so you're going to hurt a disinfranchised black population in Mississippi? Like, I was like, oh no, I know he's not about to say that. Like, what topsy-turvy world?
You can see the gears.
No, I mean, the question is,
am I wrong?
The question is like, what, if he runs for president, what happens? Because it's like,
if and when.
I mean, he's like been in that world for like, he knows what he's doing. I mean, look, it's incredible that, you have Tucker Carlson is basically, it's on all these issues. He's like, just shows you how completely shackled to like the corporate, donor world, to the oligarchic donor world, the Democratic Party is. I mean, the fact that like, they're not seeing this as an opportunity to like, I don't know, it's the Democratic Party is dead. I mean, it's dead. It's over. Like, forget about it. Like the fact that they're like, have all these kind of left-coded, people of theirs write op-eds in the New York Times, talking about, trying to like tell people that actually, being against data centers is actually being like a limousine liberal and kind of being, you got to check your privilege before you do that because all these people might not have access to AI. It's great that he's doing it. But maybe, we'll see where this goes politically. Because
I particularly call out like there's this infrastructure that has been built up, right, specifically to get Democrats to not do the obviously political gold thing and step into this vacuum. And these groups like Welcome Pack, like Searchlight, like Abundance, right? They First of all, they spent all this time after the election being like, Democrats need to do whatever it takes to win. If that means throwing trans folks under the bus, if it means throwing immigrants under the bus, like whatever. All that matters is winning. Climate too. We should throw climate under the bus, even though that does. Anyway, we could. And then, but then the entire purpose of this infrastructure is pushing Dems to not do the most clearly politically beneficial thing that they could do right now, which is come out strongly against this tech, against the data centers. And I just think like those people in particular who are all about we need to be pragmatic and do what we need to win. When it comes to fucking over vulnerable folks, like those people really have a special place in hell.
I mean, look, they just hate democracy. They just hate democracy. Like these Democratic, I don't know, they don't.
Well, and they're being paid for. To be clear, these groups are being paid for by those big tech billionaires.
Yeah, but I mean, just the politicians. I mean, I think they are ultimately afraid of true democracy because the people who are out there organizing and who are vocal and who can like pack this. Like who can pack these town halls and educate themselves. I mean, that is like a kind of a danger to them. It's not like they are a danger to them because if they start, being politically active here and kind of looking at, who their representatives are and what their track record has been and the fact that like, the Democrats that are in power now or, hope to be in power, they're going to be on their way out, because it is like, they want to like stop these movements. Actually, I mean, these movements are a danger. Anything that isn't like top-down driven is a danger to them. And data centers are right. I mean, Diana, you probably know this better than I do. I mean, that's what they truly hate is democracy, right? Truly.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of why the Huber article in the Times was so frustrating because he says, well, the Green New Deal project kind of failed and Biden, didn't get any credit for his environmental policies. It's like, well.
He was unpopular.
But also the Green New Deal was crushed by the Democratic Party. Yeah. AOC came in on her first day of Congress with a sit-in in Nancy Pelosi's office, and she said or did something to AOC that made AOC basically never talk about it again. Half her staff left, Shrikant Chakrabarti and Corbin Trent, and we never heard about it again. Don't act like this was an organic movement that failed because there wasn't a lot of popular support about it. Joe Biden, to your point, I think, Aaron, you said this, didn't even call his climate program a climate program, ran away from it. It was insufficient. It got cut from being, I think, like a $60 billion program. It was huge, and it got cut to like 1/10 of its original size. There was a program they could. I remember this is all coming back to me in flashbacks. We talk about this incessantly at the beginning of Biden's administration when he had the trifecta. He could have, there was like a relatively small amount of money that it would have taken to decarbonize, to make all of the school buses in the country electric, right? Like, and you can champion that as an easy win. Our kids aren't huffing diesel fumes on their way to school anymore. Great. They cut that so they could have done like 1/10 of the buses. Okay, no, of course they're not going to get credit for decarbonizing 1/10 of the school bus fleet. You can't even brag about that because you sound pathetic.
Yeah.
Biden didn't brag about it. Well, even if he wanted to, there was nothing to brag about by the time they nickel and dimed this thing into oblivion.
Also, I mean, like the IRA reading in that piece is also a bit ridiculous. Like we're saying, like you're saying, the thing was, cut to shreds. Biden's unpopular. You had the inflation happening at the same time. Good luck getting through any sort of positive economic message. The lead times between, pushing the project and anything actually being complete, massive. And like the Democrats just shit the bed on any sort of communication about anything that he was trying to do. And you're left with scraps. You're left with bits that you're almost impossible to advocate for, like you said.
Right. Most voters had not heard of the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
And when they were told about it, they loved it. That suggests that more messaging on climate, not less, would have actually helped Harris and the Democrats, even though the IRA was not built, it was built with capital in mind and not in ways that were optimized to benefit working people.
It's just obfuscation, always, because climate change, is affecting people with less means more, harder than those people with money. I mean, you can look at like the fires in California. The people who have money and good insurance, they can rebuild their homes, after a fire sweeps through. But people who don't have insurance, didn't have money for insurance, or underinsured, or even the insurance, because they were dislocated, that they live somewhere else. I mean, the people who don't have money, I mean, climate change is like it only kind of hits it because if you are, underprivileged, and if you're struggling, and you're struggling to make, put food on the table, the things that are the most pressing to you are going to be the things that you think about, which is like work, money, time with kids, all these things, taking care of your aging parents or whatever. And of course, so climate, when it comes hard, because it completely, turns over your world, destroys your world. And like the data centers, again, like why they're so potent is because they are like a calamity for people. They are like a calamity.
I want to put a really fine point on this. Because, like I said, I couldn't find much information about the data center fire guy. They are simultaneously, they just made it, what is the law that just passed to make bail funds illegal? They did something similar around the people they brought RICO charges against people who were passing out flyers and trying to raise bail funds for people protesting cop cities. And there's a pattern that's emerging where they're making it increasingly difficult to protest these things. They're making it criminal, in fact, to protest these things. They are demonstrating a remarkable ability to get approval for through means that Tucker so clearly described, the corruption that is involved in these kind of practices, and to build data centers in cop cities while we're still waiting on high-speed rail across the country that for some magical reason can't get the same approvals as quickly. And I want people to be really clear-eyed about what's happening here, because the Minority Report of it all is very much on the wall. Like they're making it impossible to oppose these things. We do not live in a democracy. And when I have debates, like I respected her from coming on. I really appreciate the debate. I'm not trying to bad talk. But when I have debates with people with a more liberal orientation, like I did recently with ContraPoints on this show, and there's a kind of like befuddlement when I raise the corruption of the system, the lack of the primary process, not having a democracy, the extent to which corporate influence is making it so that the popular items that people want on a bipartisan basis are not being acted upon. That befuddlement, that head in the sand, that unwillingness to recognize the world.
You don't think Nancy Pelosi wanted single payer?
Aaron, be nice, Aaron. I'm trying to be nice. But yeah, I mean, like, you want to shake the shoulders of someone like that, because it's like, you're supposed to be on my side and we're spending too much energy arguing with you while they're literally setting up the fences of our internment around us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I add, because I feel like, Edward, sorry, because I actually want to like piggyback on what Edward was saying earlier. I'm going to bring it back to data centers. And and why it's being pushed through so quickly, why it's being kind of why we're seeing this kind of like race to build these things. And it is truly the financialization of this stuff, and its ties to the stock bubble and to just the casino economy that we all live in. Just that people's wealth is tied in the stock market. The people who have money and in pensions and all this stuff. And so it is really a bubble. And to keep the bubble going, you need to feed it. You need to feed it AI promises of like of like utopia is about to happen, but we need to build this up. And so all the valuations of these, companies depend on them being able to sort of at least prove that they have the capacity to do this stuff. And so in a way, we're having almost like a repeat of like the 2008, crash or the run up into that, where because Wall Street was just engorging itself on these, like these kind of like exotic financial instruments, they were creating these mortgage-backed securities that were supposed to be totally risk-free. And investors couldn't get enough of it. And it was like, it was just like boo. It was just like creating this huge speculative bubble on Wall Street.
Talk more specifically about that, actually, from not the 90s stuff, but what's happening now. I listened to one of your guys' podcasts, sorry. And there was this conversation about what is causing the bubble. We had a guest on here, Nita Say-Chan. I thought what she has to say was very important about why there's such an investment in the militarization. It's because, the promise of what AI was supposed to do in terms of having kind of this sentience, it was never going to happen. Cory Doctorow has talked about this as well. And so to find the application for all of this investment, what it is good at is doing the surveillance, drone technology, military application stuff. That's why you have Matt Karp saying things like, we're all in on the military. We have to support our troops, suddenly sounding like, a Green Beret.
The industry has to support the warfighter. The one thing, though, that I think even now is underestimated by all actors in industry, and including in Silicon Valley, is how disruptive these technologies are. If you are going to disrupt the economic and therefore political power significantly of one party's base, highly educated, often female voters who vote mostly Democrat, and military and working class people who do not feel supported, and you feel like you believe that that's going to work out politically, you're in an insane asylum. Like, that you cannot have it. This technology disrupts humanity's trained, largely Democratic voters, and makes their economic power less, and increases the economic power of vocationally trained, working class, often male voters, and so these disruptions are going to disrupt every aspect of our society. And to make this work, we have to come to an agreement of what it is we're going to do with the technology. How are we going to explain to people who are likely going to have less good and less interesting jobs from their perspective? And how is it that we are going, and by the way, on the military thing, these technologies are dangerous societally. The only justification you could possibly have would be that if we don't do it, our adversaries and will do it, and we will be subject to their rule of law. So if you decouple this from the support of the military, you're going to have an enormous problem explaining to the American people, why is it that we're absorbing the risk of disrupting the very fabric of our society, including the most powerful parts of our society, if it's not because it's about maintaining our ability to be American in the near term and long term. And
but this issue of like why it is such a bubble and how building the physical infrastructure helps to keep the bubble afloat, I think is something that I know that I don't understand as clearly and would appreciate some clarification on.
Yeah, you're probably.
I mean, I one good example. I think a recent example is Meta's data center that they're building in Richland Parish in Louisiana. It's rural. They started it in a rural unincorporated community that's the northwestern part of Louisiana, and so it comes out to about almost $30 billion is going to be the development cost. And so what you do is you say, okay, well, we want to build a data center. We also want to build some energy on site so that we don't have to rely on the grid, and we're going to also sell it to the public by saying we're building 3 gas power plants, right? And that this is going to 2 of them are for the data center. 1 of them is for the grid. This is going to help ensure that we're not competing with residential or other commercial uses for the grid. But how are we also going to, finance it? This is a massive project. Facebook, for example, and a lot of these firms, they don't want that asset. They don't want the liability. They don't want the spending to appear on their books because it'll affect their credit rating and their ability to borrow. They don't want to just directly borrow. So what they do is they usually engage in a lot of complicated creative accounting. What Facebook did, for example, was it says, okay, let's take Blue Owl Capital, which is this alternative asset manager that's been involved in financing a lot of the data center expansion and infrastructure projects. And they're saying, okay, let's make a special purpose vehicle. Which is going to be this legal entity that will actually own the data center. And we'll do a joint venture between the both of us. And so Blue Owl Capital, who's the investor, will on the books essentially be controlling the board of this joint venture. They'll own 80% of it. Facebook will own 20% of it. They'll get, and they'll both contribute some money to get it started going. To attract investors and to raise capital to actually build out the data center and its infrastructure, they sell out debt. They sell a bunch of bonds, and they say, okay, we're going to sell about $27 billion worth of bonds to investors who will then sell those bonds to other investors. The idea being, well, even though this is technically on the books owned by Blue Owl Capital, because Meta is going to be the sole tenant of this data center, it's their data center essentially, this means that it's a worthy project. And so that you should invest in it. These bonds are going to be worth a lot of money because, Meta needs AI, and Meta is going to be in that building for the next 4 to 20 years because they have leases that are going to renew every 4 years. And so you can essentially say, I want to borrow money, but I don't want to do it in a way that will hurt my credit rating. So I'll borrow other people's money and I'll create this sort of scheme which will make them feel like it's safe because a large hyperscaler is backing the build and is going to be the only person renting the data center and using it for AI. I'm also going to do a guarantee. They called it a residual value guarantee. And this says, if for any reason the demand in AI falls in the larger market, we are going to enter into a transaction where we're going to stop the lease, sell the data center, and make all the bondholders whole. And this is a guarantee that effectively is like another payment on the bond itself or towards the bondholders. So you got Facebook paying rent on the data center. You got Facebook paying, this sort of premium or this sort of guarantee to the bondholders, and you also have the bondholders getting, interest on the bond in of itself. So this sort of arrangement is one way to think of it is like, oh, well, Facebook needs to do this because they don't want, they don't have the capital, even though they do, they don't have the capital to pay it up front. But another way to do it, I think, is as we're talking about feeding the bubble, whether you believe AI has transformative potential or not, there's not enough capital to actually build a thing. You need to use debt to finance and build it out. And you need to use debt in a way that will not affect your ability to continue to use debt in the future to build it out. And you also need to use that in a way where if it blows up, it doesn't destroy your other ventures or devalue your other ventures here, there, in other parts of the country, because Meta has data centers in Ohio. They have data centers in Texas, right? They have data centers across the country that they're also trying to insist are worth a certain value, should be attractive to investors who should buy in the bonds or, lend them money essentially for this, but should not think or pay too much attention to external factors in the market, whether there's demand or not. And so I think, the financialization is very important because for some structure like that, you don't exactly know where the risk is coming in, because what you're doing is now the data center becomes an asset and now you're making securities, that are backed by these assets, which are like, is the data center going to be occupied? Some data centers have been closed across the world because people didn't trust the tenants, right? Or there have been data centers where Oracle has been a tenant and financiers have been like, we don't want to fund this project because we don't trust Oracle. We need another tenant to come in. This has been something that's been plaguing the Stargate project, the $500 billion project that we're supposed to be doing.
Why aren't they trusting? Because I read a little bit about how it seems like
because they're borrowing too much money. They're like, you guys are borrowing,
and that it's not real. Like the part where the payoff or whatever they thought the AI was going to be able to do, that Meta's investments, just like the virtual space or whatever.
Yeah.
Some of the
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
doesn't pay off.
Yeah.
Like no one cared. There wasn't a there. The
There has
application
to
wasn't
be
there.
There has to be
Yeah.
if you really want to make the money on the investments, every single person on the planet, or most people on the planet, either have to subscribe to multiple chatbots, or we have to figure out ways to graft them onto every
Wait, really?
corporation.
Okay, so here's what
Yeah,
I really want to ask you guys. And Masha,
I think
I'm
it's
gonna
worth.
My
It's
router.
just worth stressing that like either it's all a bubble and we're collaterally fucked when it pops, or it is this, in order for it to not be a bubble, it has to be this phenomenally successful thing that just absolutely destroys how our economy works for most people.
And
Like
it takes over our brains. Well, so to that point, like I want to ask you this: should people just be not using AI? Because I find myself very surprised by how many very smart lefty people in my life will just randomly talk about how I AI'd this and I AI'd this recipe and I asked AI what my astrology is going to be for this week. And I'm like, are you so serious right now? Or is it a fool's errand for me to think, oh, Brianna, if I personally avoid using AI, it doesn't matter because it's embedded in my Google and my Gmail's prompting me whether I ask it to or not. And it's in my Instagram searches are powered by AI and there's just nothing I can do about it.
On some level, I think the personal consumption, I mean, I think there are more, you can articulate moral reasons or aesthetic reasons or personal ethical reasons not to use it. But I think even on a baseline level, cognitive hygiene and preventing offloading thinking and other tasks to these things is the reason enough to not really touch them. Whether or not they provide a productivity boost or not, the way that they are designed by these firms requires that you offload a good deal of how you're thinking, and it corrodes.
That is an important argument, and like the hygiene and the philosophical argument, and the what it's doing to the subsequent generation. I mean, I just tweeted a joke that boomers, we complain that they never quit their jobs and they make it so that millennials can't rise up after them. But millennials are going to end up being in the same situation when we're working at 80, only because we're the last generation to learn how to think and read,
Right,
and they literally can't replace us. So like, I take that argument, but in terms of like the kind of boycott argument, do we hurt the data center people? Do we hurt the big tech people?
I think it's a moratorium. The moratorium is the only thing that's going to hurt. It's not going to be a boycott.
Because it's personal boycott, because they don't really care. I mean, the consumer is just sort of the marketing kind of that they use. When they want to have as many users as possible, daily using and it is a revenue stream. I mean, people who have subscriptions to like ChatGPT or whatever, it is a revenue stream. But I think it's more of like almost a selling point, to investors. It's like, look how many people are using it. Look, we're increasing daily usage. So
that does matter somewhat then, if they can't point to those.
I feel like it's like being vegan or vegetarian. Like you're not gonna totally tear down the
way I would think about
meat system, but like if you don't want to, I don't want to contribute to that system, so I don't eat meat. I don't want to contribute to Jeff Bezos and fucking Elon Musk taking over the world more, so I'm not going to use AI.
Yeah.
And it is also, most of the use that's actually going to generate revenue, I think, is going to end up falling down to how they sell it to governments and how they sell it to other corporations.
100%. Yeah.
And so on some level, even if we all individually boycott it, if managers really believe there's something to use, or if relationships are just built up, like how they had all the CTOs and their lawyers buying commendations and saying, I am a lieutenant of the army now, they just building these sorts of relationships between corporations and the military as part of the long-standing tradition of the military-industrial complex is just going to ensure a flow of cash, right? So there's some level of market activity that really was not going to be affected by consumer boycotts. But this is why we come back to the moratorium, because the moratorium is the thing that can actually alter the underwriting political economy that says, hey, you know what? Even if there's not demand right now, we can create demand because we can graft it onto the workplace. We can graft it onto the public sector. We can graft it onto the library. We can graft it onto the schools. And by virtue of using it, people or coming in contact with it, people will use it more in their personal lives and integrate it into their personal lives, which is, a strategy that's been happening now and working to some degree, right?
Yeah, Edward is 100% right. I agree with you 100%. Yeah, it's like the boycott and the moratorium is like that is the boycott essentially, because you're boycotting on a structural level, and preventing them from expanding.
And what do we think is going to happen with the moratorium?
I think if we're not careful, the right wing is probably going to outmaneuver us on this thing. I mean, similar with Tucker, I think that even though the data center moratorium, even though data center expansion suits some of the more surveillant and militant applications of AI, which they would support, in the short term, what's 4 years really? If you were to, agree to a data center moratorium, the United States is ahead of the open.
Really?
The United
You
States.
think that the conservatives are going to come together to pass a moratorium thinking that it's, short-term political
No, I
gain,
don't think
that
they'll
it won't
pass it.
stick?
I don't think they'll pass it. I just think that the way that some of the Democrats are talking about it, or even dragging their feet on it, they're more. I'm worried. My fear is that they'll be more able to articulate some sort of populist rhetoric that will seem like and offer some sort of credible threat.
I think the national moratorium, I think, I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's useful it's a messaging bill, but like there's over a dozen state moratoriums. Maine's legislature passed theirs before, our friend Janet Mills vetoed it. There are dozens and dozens of local communities across the country that have passed these. And so I think that is like, we are seeing at the local and state level, people without any power other than the power of their local communities going up against these billionaires and winning, because these things are passing locally.
That's such an important point
it's like
about Maine, by the way. That those are the stakes of, why is everybody coming, knives out for Graham Plattner, who I've raised concerns about on the show in the past. But, why is the establishment knives out against having like some high level leadership about these things in various states? Because they can veto. It's a stopgap against some of these policies. Why is who is governor of California so important? Well, when you have a state with a overwhelmingly liberal legislature, and you have something like CalCare coming down the pike, who's going to stop us from accidentally getting statewide Medicare for all? We got to figure out a way. Oh, thank God Arnold Schwarzenegger's there to veto it.
Right.
Thank God Gavin Newsom. We got to scuttle it before it gets to Gavin Newsom, because we can't have a liberal veto it, but we have to stop it one way or the other. You start to see why some of these races attract so much national attention when you understand like sort of the corporate implications of there being a genuine sort of lefty in charge.
Yeah. No,
this is why Fair Shake did Scorched Earth on crypto. Like, even people who supported crypto but were insufficiently supportive of crypto got burned.
Yeah.
And it's the same guy, right? AI. They hired.
Oh yeah. Chris Lehane,
right?
Yeah, Chris Lehane.
He's doing the same category.
Chris Lehane runs he runs global policy over at OpenAI, and he's been the architect for really successful lobbying campaigns to get Congress to either get out of the way of crypto or to open the floor for crypto industry to write the legislation.
Same playbook.
And crypto, I just want to make sure, crypto and data centers are extremely connected, because crypto, the more Bitcoin in particular, the more that you have that these Bitcoins are mined, the harder it is to mine them, the more compute or computational power you need to keep mining them to mint these new coins. And so you have entire data centers dedicated to just churning out Bitcoin, and so it makes sense that the guy, I actually had no idea that that he was running kind of the lobbying efforts at OpenAI, because that makes sense, because the two industries are totally connected. I mean, they have the same.
I mean, there's even a tighter connection where one of the major companies in the AI space, CoreWeave, was initially a Bitcoin miner, where they had all these GPUs that were used to do to try to get as much Bitcoin as they could possibly, and they were using excess gas on the grid, right? That was flared up, and energy that was being wasted to try to not be too much of still parasitic drain and enterprise, but not too much of a drain on the grid. And then with the massive stockpile GPUs they had, they were like, why don't we pivot to providing compute to data centers?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I really think it's worth.
I got to go for like in a couple of minutes, but but it's great and very it's an awesome conversation. Yeah,
just these local moratoriums, like it is. The most powerful people on the planet are throwing everything they have into getting these through, and local communities are coming together and they are beating them. They're stopping them. Like that. The national moratorium is a great thing to talk about, but it is at the local level where this shit it's really inspiring.
Let me pick up that point, Aaron, but I want to make sure Yasha has a chance to tell people where they can find more of him and his work before he has to go.
Oh yeah, no, just you can Google me, use ChatGPT. Yasha Levine, a lot of different websites, but yeah, Yasha Levine, in the Google, or Vampire Valley in the Google machine. But yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for letting me hang out with all of you.
No, thanks for joining us and for extending your time with us. I really appreciate it,
Thanks a
Yasha.
lot. All right, I'm logging off now. Bye.
Okay, okie dokie, bye bye. Now, Aaron, picking up on what you're saying, like I hear you, but let me articulate the skepticism I have because this feels very reminiscent of the conversation that we had over the Stop Cop Cities, where they would have these town halls. 90% of people who came to the town hall to talk about how they felt about it were against them. You had 10% that were like outside agitators that were piped in, or people from the local cops union or what have you in favor of them. And no matter what people said democratically on the ground, you got the outcome that you got. That article that I mentioned earlier, written in MarketWise about the AI data centers who had kind of the pro-business framing, opens in the following way. In a local election last week, residents of Festus, Missouri, a city of nearly 13,000 people, 35 miles south of St. Louis, flocked to the polls to defeat four incumbent council members who had a week earlier approved a $6 billion data center over the furious objections of many residents. The scene at Festus High School's gymnasium the week before had been raw. Hundreds of locals packed the bleachers. They jeered, they cursed, they pleaded, but the council voted to approve the project anyway. This is a quote from a resident. I like to point out that every meeting I've attended there has been 80 to 90% opposition, said Zach, a Festus resident. The other 10% are mostly people who don't live here. Despite that, the council approved it in the same way that Tucker Carlson pressed Kevin O'Leary about the fact that these council members can be so easily bought off. So it's not that I want to diminish the power of local activism and the pushback, but I am very wary of saying, well, that's going to save us or be ultimately successful, given the pattern we've seen across different issues. And in the case of data centers specifically, even.
I mean, I think that you're right about the challenge. Obviously, it's massive. I think it's something like 70 local communities have passed these. What cities, towns, counties have passed these. I think they have a lot of momentum in several states. So again, there's not that many. We're not going to win in every fight. I don't think there's that many fights where like the win record of regular people versus big tech billionaires is as good as this fight. Which again, it just to me is like this is something worth throwing down on.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Go ahead, Edward.
And I would say also, and even though I said, earlier, I am concerned or worried that the right wing might be able to make a move here. I think, as Aaron is saying, the data center fights are also, I think, rising and converging enough with people's economic livelihoods that we can craft or figure out ways to do some even further escalation. We're targeting or preemptively targeting places that would likely be data center sites, especially as as they add more and more to the interconnection queue, right? And there's less and less interest either in building out the grid for them, or as they have more and more difficulty with it, because there's also just a backlog on all the materials that they need on the gas turbines and the high voltage transformers, and just even on the labor for actually doing the skilled line technical work and line work that you need to build out these grids.
How do I square that with Kevin O'Leary backing this project to build a data center in Utah that's twice the size of Manhattan? How do I square the idea that I should have some confidence that, well, this thing is going to go slowly anyway because they can't get labor and materials, when these people are actively agitating to build something twice the size of Manhattan?
I would say two things. One is that these projects are more fragile than they appear because of the financing, right? The financing, they require so much capital, and they require so many boondoggles and tax breaks and assurances and advantageous rates of return to investors that strategies which figure out where to target them, I think, can yield more success than we might otherwise think. Because if we're thinking about it in the sense of like, how do we maybe on the level of the boards convince them to say no, we might lose on some of those fights, or how to convince the state utility commissions who they could intervene at the level of to say no to this, or how to convince some of the regional grid operators to say no. But if we could, I think I think the Achilles heel for a lot of these things is how do they personally assure all the investors that they're going to get their money when already you have, investment banks and firms that are usually evangelical about this stuff saying, you guys have to, there's like a $800 billion gap between what is being spent and the expected returns, and this is only going to grow. And, it's unlikely that most of the firms that are around in this space right now are going to see returns in their activity or in their investments. How are you going to square that circle, even if we think it's the most transformative activity? So I think that's part of it, where it's like part of the strategy that comes, or that I'm hopeful for, is not just, like you said, I think the national moratorium it's sort of simple, but thinking about, okay, how can we target and make painful and make investors scream on very specific points and areas so that they can back out a project, or that you can't really conceivably do a project without public buy-in, right? And this is
You can.
I mean, but you can right now. How do we develop the tools to make it so that they can't, right? I think this is the question. I think you're right, that they can't.
Kevin O'Leary is very confidently. I mean, we think he got owned by Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
But he's very confidently, he doesn't give it, he's very confidently going on that show, thinking that he can defend his position, talking about jobs are going to come to the state. And when I hear that, there's a part of me that believes Republicans, Reagan-style Republicans have managed to convince half the public that the idea of trickle down, that I'm going to bring jobs to the state, that all of this stuff justifies any number of things, building military bases, having polluting companies, all kinds of things, that they are it's now completely the norm to have expectation that it's a good thing to bring this to a country. No zoning laws. Oh, Texas is good because there's no zoning laws. I don't care if I live next to a meat packing plant. Like, these are all Republican orthodoxies at this point.
Yeah.
Data centers are new and they're very unpopular, and I'm very hopeful that it stays that way. But all I'm saying is that I would rely, the hopefulness.
I agree with you in that this is. I think it's contestable.
I think one thing
is contestable, but I think.
And I think one. No. I think one thing, we're not, the people are not going to win all of these fights against these billionaires. And so I think an important piece to bring to this conversation that your point does is to say, and so what should we be doing to try to make sure that even in those cases, there is value to the larger movement for a better world that we want.
Except the people aren't going to lose the case against the billionaires. There's 600 of them. There's 600 of them, and I think the left needs to have some different framing. This is me. I'm not asking you to co-sign to this stuff.
Wait, sorry. Can
God knows they're going to haul me off to the detention center for this.
What do you mean by that?
When you're talking to people doing this work, you're talking to people who are working in conservative rural Texas, and these people, these conservative people are saying that Bernie, he knows what he's like. There's something there, right? So it's also just thinking about how can we use this as a consciousness for people to understand that this system is broken and it is these billionaires.
Sure, but what all of you have been telling me is that people understand. People understand. 90% of the people at these town halls understand. 70% of Americans don't want a data center built near their home. I think that one of the traps that the left falls into is making everything a persuasion issue when we've already won. It's a democracy issue, not a persuasion issue.
Well, this is also,
right?
I think what I was kind of gesturing at the beginning when it comes to how we're thinking about tech is, I agree with you that it's not all a persuasion issue, but also there are large question marks, right? When we're saying, or when we're talking about, for example, I was talking about how do you make the financing, which is the vulnerable part, actually something that can be acted upon, because we don't really have many tools or mechanisms that can actually do that. But if we did, we would be able to, to compromise some of these projects. How do we do that? What does that actually
look
like?
What does that mean?
Well, so that's the question. I'm
highly interested in Googling some more information about the guy who set fires at the data center. What do you mean?
I think some people, of course, are interested or think about it in terms of property damage. But I'm also curious, okay, we are interested in organizationally trying to persuade people. We're also interested in organizationally trying to intervene at the level of these political planning bodies and commissions and doing reforms there. Is there ways that we can organizationally intervene at the level of finance? I don't know. That's a big question, that I haven't seen much look into, but also at the same time, I don't have the answer to.
We can't, this is exactly, people need to be framing tax the rich, billionaire tax, as not just like, which is fake. I hear super faithful Jonathan Cadman in my ear going like MMT. Yeah, I hear you, Jonathan. But like it's being framed as like we got to tax the rich to fund X, Y, and Z. That's how Zoran, whatever. But that's not even the best argument. The best argument is we got to get rid of billionaires so they don't do shit like build a data center next to your house.
Yeah.
And buy off your whole local government to do what they want the billionaires to do as opposed to what their constituents to do. That's the argument. And so like it's not that I don't think that people should try. And I hear you, Aaron, when you say that there's hundreds of localities around the country where they have been successful in these efforts. But the train in some like the broader train of where these people are pushing this and the investment of the tech billionaires into a different kind of a world, they could not be screaming more loudly about where they're going.
Right.
And they're being completely unsubtle about where we're going because I think that they believe, and they might be right, that it's a fait accompli. Because they understand that there is a reason why they are cracking down on forms of protest, criminalizing forms of protest, criminalizing bail funds, won't even let the search engine pull up the results on the people who've done the act of civil disobedience because they understand where they're vulnerable and where they're not. And I don't think they're so vulnerable. And like, I'm sorry, like I know I get the criticism. Well, are you going to go and firebomb the station? Okay. Well, that's an offline conversation. But realistically speaking, I feel like I'm calling balls and strikes. And we can see the ways that they manipulate democracy with impunity at all levels and various contexts. And I can see where they seem to see themselves as most vulnerable and where they are like fortifying themselves. And it's against civil disobedience.
Well, I mean, this is partly why, a lot of people talk a lot about Ellison's son, who's, trying to wrap up large swaths of digital media and cultural production. But his father, Larry Ellison is the head of Oracle, which did the $300 billion deal with OpenAI and is part of the $500 billion Stargate thing that's supposed to build the backbone of American compute infrastructure for this geopolitical order. And he is, very explicit about saying, hey, look, like, what is actually wrong with having surveillance in every single part of your life? It'll make you act better. And if you don't have anything to hide, you don't have anything to hide, right? So I think to your point, these people are pretty explicit about it. And, part of the problem is frankly, like, one of my favorite, there's a review of Andreas Malm's body of work in the London Review of Books, and it opens up with the line, "Where are all the eco-terrorists?" And it talks about just, given how bad the world is, why do you not see the sort of sustained revolt in the public and action to trying to push back against fossil fuel empire, fossil fuel, sheer dominance of it, right? And talking about the pretty successful criminalization of that form of protest, of property damage. And if the door is closed on,
call it property damage. I don't even want to call it property damage.
I know.
We've already lost.
I want to flag
I'm saying civil disobedience.
NSPM 7, guys. We should be careful. NSPM 7.
All I'm saying is
they passed NSPM 7, so we can't even have a flipping conversation about the reality of the world.
But no, civil disobedience is like that has always been such a critical part of the toolkit, and as part of this, I just also think it's like, if we can't fucking beat, like, shame on us. We're up against, as you said, it's like a couple hundred of the worst, creepiest, most like antisocial pedophiles, like Sam Altman. He's talking about like it costs the same as like training a human child. Like, these people are freaks, and most people, when they see them as freaks, and most people agree that like a couple dozen freaks shouldn't own half the country. We should be able to build a majoritarian coalition against these motherfuckers. There's
600 freaks. Whoever runs for president on the campaign of in the 600 freaks, I'm on board. The freaks can save themselves by forgoing, like, giving up their money and stopping being freaks. But nobody, like, the world, everybody's conservative mom, when Luigi Mangione allegedly did what he did, allegedly, there were people who say, well, I wouldn't have done it, and I don't condone violence, but shoulder shrug. And I say that only to say that that's the temperature of normal people in the world. That normal people in the world understand that there's violence everywhere constantly, but we're only supposed to care when it's one individual and one gun and a bullet, and not systemic violence that is immiserating all of us. And Medicare for all is one of those issues, but these data centers and the coming AI jobs apocalypse is another thing that people are understanding. And there's a political opportunity here that feels so much bigger than, and I really don't mean to diminish the work that people are doing locally that you're pointing to, Aaron. I really think it's important. But we can demand more than protest locally. We have the wind at our backs, and it's almost like we can't feel it. No one is acting with the exigency. We're talking about this data moratorium, and we're all sitting here going, oh yeah, but it's not going to pass. Obviously, it's not going to pass. I mean, I understand the real politic of it, but like our outward messaging should be like, it's unconscionable that this thing wouldn't pass.
Oh yeah, of course.
Like, are you fucking kidding? Like, what kind of world do we live in where this obvious thing that everybody wants isn't gonna pass, and then instead you have random celebrities sitting around going, well, I'm trying to find a clip of it. Well, AI is already here. That's the messaging. It's all already here, and there's nothing we can do about it. It's all already here. They are terrified because it's not here, and they're scrambling to get their foot in the door before any real mobilization happens. And I feel like we're just thinking a little too small, is all I'm saying.
Well, yeah, no, I hear you. What I was saying with, thinking about the climate stuff is I do think, like, we are at the verge of, and this is part of the desperation that's happening on all corners, I feel like a political horizon where if, the AI bubble and the AI oligarchs can land the plane, and if they land the plane, they will get everything they wanted and more. But if they don't, we could actually, and we, like you said, we have the opportunity to actually create and struggle for and build a radically different thing. Start with the basis of it being like, let's do something about the freaks that are trying to drive surveillance and remote control society. But I mean, this is part of the reason why I think the window is closing, right? Because it's either realize the dream of figuring out a new way to both re-legitimize capitalism and re-legitimize old forms of hierarchy, and re-legitimize, not necessarily by saying getting everyone to believe again that, listen, some of us are just born in the caste or race or specific racial strictures that never, or, lots in life that never need to be violated, but having the sort of preponderance of force and surveillance that can make it, as natural as breathing in some way or another, or figuring out a way to oppose that and struggle for something else. But I also feel that even though we do have the momentum and we do have this opportunity before us, sometimes it does feel like we're, flailing around in the dark because of some of the overwhelming nature of the victories that they've scored or on the verge of scoring.
I appreciate both of you for flailing around in the dark a little bit with me today. Aaron, where can people find you and your work on the internet and beyond?
Got a Substack, Aaron Regunberg. I'm on Twitter. And have a podcast that I co-host with The Nation called the Fighting Fascism Podcast.
Amazing. And Edward, where can people find more of you? Any upcoming work, any Substacks, all of that stuff? Now's your chance.
Yeah, I'm a co-host of This Machine Kills with my friend Jaden Sadowski. We talk about the political economy of tech. I have a newsletter, The Tech Bubble, on Substack, where I also write about the same thing. I have a piece coming up that's, or a few things that are coming up largely about data centers and also military-industrial complex attempts to push compute into more corners of our lives.
Please send me all the links to your stuff. This episode, I don't think is actually going to come out to next Thursday. Right. So if you have stuff that's published in between now and then, please send them my way and I will include them in the show notes. Thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of Bad Faith Podcast. I thought this was an exceptional panel. We got a lot said. This is an issue that's not going away, so we're going to have to revisit these topics, hopefully with some of these folks coming back to the pod. Thanks for supporting Bad Faith Podcast. You can get an additional episode every Monday at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. As always, take care of yourselves. And remember, despite evidence to the contrary, that you should keep the faith.
Yeah.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.